Imagine waking up in a world where your favorite device never learned to vanish into your palm, where the word smartphone sounds like a corporate euphemism for a warmed-over PDA, and digital music feels like a warehouse with a door half open and a guard who never smiles. Imagine a company with a rainbow apple that slowly fades to gray because the one man who once painted its colors decided, in a single quiet moment, to do nothing. Imagine that the choice that turned an entire industry fluorescent with possibility never happened at all. Imagine that he never came back. He was the brilliant contradiction, a barefoot mystic who sold the future in jeans and a black turtleneck, the perfectionist who turned circuits into talismans and keynotes into sermons. He co-founded a company in a garage and taught the machine to purr. Later, exiled from his own kingdom, he built another, sterile and beautiful, as if designed in the vacuum of space, and he bought a third made of light and stories and talking lamps that taught children how to forgive. Then this is the world we remember. He returned to the first kingdom, pulled it back from the cliff, and taught it to fly. iMac, iPod, iPhone, iPad, a sequence of clean syllables that read-drew maps and reprogrammed our hands. But not here. Here, the call goes differently. It is late afternoon in 1997, and the sun is a sheet of molten copper behind the Palo Alto trees. The next office is hushed in the studied way only true stillness can be, a stillness that listens to itself. Steve stands with the phone pressed to his ear, thumb against his lip, eyes on nothing. On the other end, there are board numbers and bankers and the antiseptic promise of a rescue that sounds, to his ear, like a long apology. He is not a sentimental man about institutions. He is sentimental about product, about the moment something clicks and a thing stops being a thing and becomes a friend. He can feel Apple's breath thin, ragged, hot on the line. He thinks about the mess he will inherit, about Copeland, about a culture that forgot how to say no. He thinks about Pixar, about the way a lamp can hop across a screen and make a room full of adults laugh without feeling like children. He thinks about Next, elegant and expensive, a black monolith that whispered to a future that never fully answered back. He thinks about his health in the way men think about it when they are too young to measure it. On the line, someone says the number again. The board will acquire Next. He can return as an advisor, and then there is a hole where the promise should be. In the hole, Steve hears a dozen versions of himself being swallowed by committee. He sees, for a blink, a version of the story in which he wins the fight, a different blink in which he loses, and a long, steady look in which he becomes the sort of executive he despises. A manager of managers, a gardener pruning dead wood that keeps growing back, a man whose genius is spent cleaning other people's rooms. He feels a sting of vanity. He is not immune, and swallows it like a pill. And then he says, almost gently, no. The line goes quiet. He softens his tone, explains that Pixar is not finished with him, that Next has other suitors, that he is tired of the word turnaround, because it implies that the point of motion is to return where you came from. He believes in forward. He wishes them luck. He means it. Everything that follows begins with that refusal, the way a storm begins with air deciding it wants to move. Without him, the rainbow fades faster. Apple courts BOS and gets a deal that looks practical on paper and smells like reheated leftovers in the lab. The clones drain the lifeblood, while the brand scrubs its own face raw in the mirror, listing values like vitamins and swallowing them too late. The company staggers through another year of beige boxes that nobody loves, their faces a fastening of screws and compromises. Retailers who used to smile now fold their arms. Warehouse managers start to know the machines by serial number because they refuse to leave. Somewhere in a Cupertino conference room, a marketing director says the word synergy with a straight face, and everyone nods because disagreement would cost them what little certainty remains. Steve's calendar shifts into a different orbit. Pixar, that kingdom of light, is rising like a second moon. The sequel that shouldn't work does. And then a new story about monsters who clock in at a factory to harvest screams, and then a fish who forgets. Inside those offices he is both the dragon and the bridge, as frightening as a deadline, as necessary as a road. He is not a director, not exactly a producer, not precisely a CEO. He is the editor of the soul, the man who asks, "What is this really about?" and will not leave you alone until you answer. In this universe, his name becomes a different currency, less the wizard of glass and aluminum, more the patron saint of story. He negotiates with the old studios as if staring down an operating system that won't boot. He is relentless, enchanting, and dangerous to underestimate. Next, meanwhile, refuses to vanish like a failed experiment. Sun Microsystems makes an offer modest in its money and generous in its promise. We'll put your heart in the chest of the web. The code migrates like an exiled people, changing its names, shedding its accents, finding work in new neighborhoods. The dream of an object-oriented world doesn't become a shrine. It becomes plumbing, invisible and everywhere. In private, sometimes at night, he runs a finger along the sharp edge of the old black cube and feels both pride and an ache like regret's slower cousin, because there is a thing missing. Not the stage, not the applause, not even the market share. The thing missing is the feeling you get when you place a perfect object into a stranger's hand and watch their face change. At Pixar, he gives the world feelings that live inside light. He knows the world will always need those. But his hands remember the weight of hardware the way a musician's fingers remember the keys. A word begins to circle him like a hawk. Device. Around him, the market bends in shapes that no one, not even he, fully predicted. Sony has the right to music and the habit of drawing thin lines around everything it owns. Microsoft has the appetite for platforms and the will to flood any dry landscape with copies. Nokia has an empire of plastic rectangles that make the world reachable, if not yet intimate. The web is a bulletin board that is trying to become a city. Everyone talks about convergence the way people in a desert talk about rain, loudly and with more prayer than plan. The first time he says it aloud, it is to Lorene at the kitchen table where their children have just finished dinner and the plates are still warm with food. "I want to make a device again." She looks at him with the blend of respect and gravity that strong people wear when they love someone who belongs as much to the world as to them. "Will you build another company?" He shakes his head. "I don't want to manage another company. I want to manage one product like it's a film. One thing done so well, it makes 10 other things irrelevant." He smiles, and for a second, the boy in the garage is visible. "But who will build it with you?" she asks, if not Apple. He says a name that surprises even him. Sony. The courtship is strange, part tango and part board meeting. They love each other's legends and irritate each other's habits. He loves that they engineer like craftsmen and plan like thieves. They love that he demands a story from a circuit board. He hates the way they guard their catalogs like monasteries guard relics. They hate the way he refuses to ship anything that still smells like committee. But in 2001, they sign a pact to build a small, black rectangle that will do 3 things in a way no consumer device has yet done. Play music that you own, connect to a store that won't make you feel like a shoplifter, and sync with your life as if it were honored to be invited. It will not be an iPod. It will be something whose name a Tokyo copywriter pulls from a haiku. It will look like Next Learn to Swim. The launch is awkward and ecstatic. The price is too high. The supply is too low. The battery life is a rumor. But people hold it, and they understand. His team does not wear turtlenecks on stage, and there are no standing ovations. He is rarely the official spokesman. He is technically a partner, and Sony is proud. He appears at the edge of the stage like a rumor, a constellation of clean syllables in a press release that most reporters skim past. He is the ghost in the machine And he is fine with that, or tells himself he is. Because something else is rising, something that fills him with the heat that only threat can provide. Microsoft has a device that looks like a sugar cube with buttons, and it sells like a stapler because the world already owns too many staplers. Nokia bolts little players onto the sides of their phones like organs transplanted with tape. A company called Palm insists the future belongs to tiny pens that everyone keeps losing. And Google, a company that once sold a clean box with a blinking cursor and a promise of relevance, starts to experiment with a pocket-sized computer that seems to know what you mean before you finish meaning it. He is fascinated by the edges, where the old art collides with the new hunger. He fights with Sony in rooms with soundproof walls about the tyranny of DRM, about the way locking a song can feel like choking a bird. They fight back because legal is a full-time job in their world and risk has a body count. He loses the argument often enough to feel the slow bleed of compromise. The store is good. It is not beautiful. The device is beautiful. It is not inevitable. Meanwhile, in Cupertino, inevitability dies a little every quarter. The B-based system is clever where it should be simple and simple where it should be loud. Engineers who could have built temples spend their days wallpapering a house that leans. The brand experiments with translucent plastic as if color could cure culture. A rumor spreads that Sun is sniffing, and that IBM is circling, and that Dell wants a trophy to mount above a fireplace the size of a lobby. None of it happens yet. But the stock chart looks like a cliff face with too many climbers and not enough rope. There is a night in 2003 when Steve almost calls them back. He is alone with a prototype of this second-generation rectangle, a version that should be faster, should be thinner, should be more itself and less a promise of itself. He has just come from a Pixar screening where a scene with no dialogue made 3 men cry. He holds the small machine and feels the two halves of his life pulling at him like tides. Apple needs a product that makes them feel like a company again. The market needs a story that makes it feel like a future again. I could do it, he thinks. I could send an email and be on a plane by morning. He imagines walking into an all-hands meeting and asking a question that will fix a culture simply because it demands an honest answer. He imagines the smell of a factory at dawn. He imagines a rectangle without buttons, a sheet of glass that wipes away the fussy and the fragile and hands the world back to your thumb. He does not make the call. Instead, he doubles down on the partnership that makes sense on paper and gnaws at him in private. Sony is exacting and imperial. He is exacting and insurgent. The second-generation device is better. The store is less insulting. The word ecosystem glows and pitches like a saint's halo. He starts a skunkworks inside the partnership that he refuses to name. The goal is a phone that is not a phone so much as a pocket door to everything. He sketches ideas in the margins of notes from meetings he cannot leave. He dreams about edges and pixels and gestures that feel like the body talking to itself. Then, like a whisper on a train platform that everyone hears at once, the rumor arrives. Google is building a full operating system for phones. Microsoft is licensing something called a Smart Suite to any manufacturer with a womb. Apple, poor, slow, beautiful, precarious Apple, has licensed out its brand to a handful of fashion phones in Europe that take pictures like postcards and crash like teenagers. The world is cracking toward an answer. He can feel it. He is on the wrong side of the crack. The phone project becomes a war inside a marriage. Sony's divisions circle the idea like cats that can't decide whether to pounce or sleep. Music wants control. Movies want distribution windows. Gaming wants performance. Legal wants chains. He wants silence and a single button that refuses to be a button. The prototype they finally build looks like a compromise held together by charisma. It launches with a commercial that wins awards for editing. Early adopters buy it, forgive it, then grow tired of forgiving. When a journalist asks him in a rare on-the-record moment, whether he worries that the future of the pocket will belong to companies who own both the device and the operating system and the store and the will to say no. He smiles with a brightness that reads like menace and says, "It will belong to whoever can decide what not to do." The quote plays like a riddle on CNBC. On a message board somewhere, a kid in college copies it into a notebook he will keep for years. Here is the part where the darkness starts to cool from vapor into weather. Pixar's miracle machine begins to groan under the weight of its own record. The public loves the films, but expects transcendence on a schedule. Disney is no longer a partner with a handshake. It is a studio with a spreadsheet that makes gravity out of deadlines. Steve spends more hours in rooms negotiating merchandising than he would like to admit. He is a billionaire whose days feel like a train ride through familiar towns that have all been renamed after their sponsors. The device partnership keeps him half sated and half hungry. Apple, without him, wobbles like a bicycle ridden by committee. The web grows teeth and starts eating newspapers, while social networks turn friendship into a product feature. He feels often like a composer at a fireworks show, hearing notes where everyone else is watching light. And then, because time is both a thief and a teacher, his body speaks in a language he can no longer ignore. A shadow on a scan. A conversation with a doctor whose face has learned how to be kind without promising anything. He is angrier than he thinks he has the right to be, not at fate, not at biology, but at the possibility that he will leave without having built the one thing his hands still ache to hold. He does what he can. He changes everything he can. He begins to think about legacy not as marble, but as momentum. He starts writing letters he will never send and product briefs he will never show to anyone. And still, somewhere in those same months, Sony releases a third-generation device that finally feels less like a committee and more like a statement. The store, bruised by piracy and pride, loosens its grip. The rectangle becomes a pane of glass that unlocks with a gesture that feels like a secret handshake. It is not the first. It is not the best. But for a moment, a sharp, honest moment, it feels inevitable. Sales climb. Reviewers use the word clean with a fervor that makes him smile. In a different keynote in a different city, a different CEO walks across a stage in sneakers and introduces a different phone that changes everything while claiming not to. The future, impatient, begins to consolidate. In Cupertino, there is one last rumor. The company will sell itself to a computer manufacturer with a silver logo that looks like a fraction of a circle. In Palo Alto, a man who once said no to a rescue takes a walk at dusk and counts the streetlights as if they were beads on a string. He is not a religious man in the way churches define it. He is a religious man in the way obsession resembles prayer. He asks one question, the same question that has followed him since the garage. What is the simplest, truest thing we can build that forgives the world for being complicated? He knows the answer. He also knows he may never get to ship it. The night after that walk, he turns the same question in his hands until it warms like a stone from a riverbed. He imagines a future arranged on a single pane of glass, not because glass is modern, but because it disappears. He imagines a store that feels like a library, not like a lock. He imagines the dignity of a device that asks you to touch it the way you touch a person you trust. And then he imagines the hallway between those imaginations and the rooms where budgets are measured, where meetings multiply because nobody wants to be the author of a mistake. He does not resent the hallway. He has learned to resent time. Apple's news arrives on a gray morning. A larger company, sober, efficient, allergic to magic, proposes a merger dressed as a hospice. The announcement is careful with words like synergy and continuity of brand. Careful not to say, "We will sell the furniture before we burn the house." Developers who once lined up for scraps of documentation read the press release twice and then go to lunch with their resumes in their pockets. In a small office in San Jose, a graphic designer folds the last rainbow poster into a tube and decides not to hang it in the next place. The share price bumps, as if relief and sadness can both be measured in the same currency. He doesn't call. He walks. He thinks of the small rebellions that used to add up to a culture. The way a team would push a prototype across a table, and the room would fall silent, and then someone would say, "This is wrong," and also right, and then they would proceed to find the exact line where wrong turns into inevitable. He wonders where that line goes when you leave a place. He wonders whether a culture can be bottled to survive a crossing. He suspects not. The Sony partnership matures in a way that marriages sometimes do. They stop talking about what they hope to be and concentrate on what they can still build together without breaking skin. The music rectangle becomes an ecosystem with fewer sharp edges. The third version of the phone ships with a touch layer that feels, for once, less like compromise and more like intention. It has a home button that sighs when you press it, as if relieved you found it. The camera is finally decent. The battery no longer behaves like a promise someone made to you when they were young. The ads are tasteful, elegant, and too polite. The carriers extract their tolls. The lawyers tuck their clauses beneath the fold. The future arrives in installments, each one the right size to be installed by a committee. And then a hinge turns somewhere else. Google releases an operating system that makes room for others to imagine. Manufacturers spread like fast-growing species across newly opened ground. In Shenzhen, a small team uses the stack to build a phone that is cheap, handsome in a way that feels almost inevitable, and slippery with convenience. In Mountain View, an app marketplace blossoms like an argument nobody can win, but everyone keeps showing up to. 1,000 developers teach 1,000,000 phones new tricks, and 1,000,000,000 hands learn new habits. The web, which once felt like a country with its own laws, dissolves into a quilt of apps sewn on screens, each one a small room with a door you can tap. The center of computing slides from desks to pockets like a coin across a counter. He admires the speed. He hates the noise. He misses the voice that says, "No." He tries to say it inside the partnership. He draws a rectangle on a whiteboard and then erases the corners until it looks not like a device, but like a decision. He asks for the absence of Chrome, for icons that vanish into the meaning of themselves, for typography that breathes like a lung. He asks for a store that treats artists like partners and customers like guests. He loses some of those fights and wins enough to make the losing feel like a tax rather than a defeat. He throws out 2 prototypes in one afternoon and spends the rest of the evening apologizing with a sincerity that surprises even him. Pixar is the counterweight. The films deepen. The audience grows. The business complicates because success is a kind of gravity. Disney wants to own what it can count. He negotiates with the intensity of a man who knows that story is a living thing and corporate ownership is a form of climate. The acquisition, when it comes, is generous in public and precise in private. He gains a seat at a table that used to be a stage. He loses the friction that comes from being an opposing force. He learns a new skill, protecting something by changing it slowly enough that the change looks like preservation. The press begins to draw his life as a diptych. On one panel, the man of movies and partnership phones, the patron of animators, the fierce negotiator who turned lamps and toys and monsters into empathy machines. On the other, the ghost of a different decade, the entrepreneur whose name is a synonym for product, the man who didn't go back to the company that made him into a verb. He reads none of it and all of it. He throws most of the clippings away. He keeps a few in a drawer with a paperclip, as if they might stop the pages from becoming story again. At home, his children grow. He measures time in their voices, not in quarters. He tells them that devices are tools and toys and mirrors, and that the trick is never to confuse which one you're looking at. He cooks when he can. He carves decisions down to the bone at work, and then salvages patience at the dinner table by refusing to debate what cannot be argued into love. He is, for stretches, happy. He is, beneath that, haunted by the outline of a product he has not yet built. Some nights he sketches. The glass slab with no buttons, but the one you cannot see. The gesture language that would teach a child how to speak to a machine by letting the hand remember what the mind forgets. The camera that is not a lens so much as a memory organ. The store that is not a store, but a city with good sidewalks and clear laws. The privacy policy that fits on one page and could be read aloud without anyone leaving. The battery he still cannot cheat. He writes in a casual hand that tightens at the corners when he is certain. He tucks the sketches into a manila envelope as if saving daylight in case of a power outage. In 2008, the newly merged Not Quite Apple, that now shares a name with a colder creature, tries one more time to catch breath. It launches a music player that looks like a kindness, but feels like a late apology. It licenses a phone operating system that seems, on paper, to have all the right boxes checked. The device feels like a document written by an honest person on the wrong deadline. Reviewers are gentle, because everyone understands what a hospice is for. The stores keep the display polished. The boxes move. They do not move fast. By then, a generation of users has grown into phones shaped like open questions. Messages slide like rain. Photos climb into the network and return as stories. Payments hop across air. Albums turn back into songs and then into streams. The world, swarmed by rectangles, acquires a posture. Head bowed, thumb forward, backlit eyes. Without a single company to dictate the cadence, the industry blooms like a crowded garden. Some flowers choke others. Some weeds turn out to be herbs. And entropy does what entropy is paid to do. Standards are multilingual. Designed languages multiply. The dignity of restraint is learned later and by fewer. What the world doesn't have, at least not yet, is the cathedral of retail that became, in the other life, a secular church where technology was blessed by service. There are stores, yes, and some are good, and in a few of them, a person in a bright shirt will fix your machine without scolding you for breaking it. But the idea of a temple devoted to the care of the object and the person together arrives haltingly, split across chains and franchises, less a revolution than a series of refurbishments. He ages. He gets sick and survives and gets sick again. He tells almost no one because words change the shape of rooms, and he is trying to keep his room simple. He learns the feeling of a good day by the hour. He practices the art of choosing where to spend his disease. He chooses meetings where arguments can still turn into decisions. He chooses screenings where the light still rearranges the air inside a human being. He chooses dinners that can be eaten slowly. He chooses, when he has to, silence. A friend persuades him to meet a pair of founders working in a warehouse in South San Francisco. They are building sensors for the home. They talk about doors the way he talks about interfaces. They want advice and funding and a story. He wants to see whether their hands shake when they hold their own prototype. They do. He invests. He writes a one-page manifesto about temperature that reads, somehow, like a parable. He disappears again into the work that feeds him and the life that holds him up. Years later, the world will know the company's name. He will be a footnote in their press release, a seed in their orchard. The fourth generation of the Sony phone arrives with a glass face that finally feels like a window and not a compromise wearing makeup. It is thin. It is fast. It is elegant enough to forgive the 3 menial apps you cannot delete. The store's rules are clearer and kinder. The advertisement shot in black and white shows a hand placing the device on a table, and everything else in the room arranges itself politely around it. For a season, it is the object he wanted it to be. For a season, he allows himself to be proud. For a season, he almost forgets the alternate universe that sits just to the left of his heart, humming like a refrigerator in a quiet kitchen. And then the world does what it always does. It keeps moving. The open platforms outrun polish with speed. The closed ones outrun speed with integration. A dozen camera innovations teach everyone to speak in pictures. Fitness bands guess at our hearts. A car company in California dares to turn batteries into Ferraris, and then, audaciously, into taxes. Rumors float, because rumors cannot help themselves, that the merged company with the half-apple DNA is quietly shuttering its design lab and renting the space to an enterprise software division with a taste for gray carpets. A younger competitor unfolds a phone into a tablet and then folds it back into a phone again, like a hand teaching itself origami. He writes a letter he will never send to a CEO he has never met about how to say no without making the people who have to say yes feel small. He drafts a speech he will never give about the moral dimension of interfaces. He reads it to himself in an empty auditorium after a fundraiser and decides it is too sentimental. He tears the pages in half. Then he smooths them and throws them away carefully, as if to avoid cutting his fingers. When the end comes, it is private. There is no state funeral for a man who refused to become a state. There are stories. A former intern tells a friend that he once returned a prototype because the radius of one corner felt suburban instead of urban. An animator says he made her cut 5 seconds from a scene she loved, and that, when she saw the new version, she loved it more and hated him less. A lawyer says he learned to write shorter contracts just by watching him frown at long ones. A teenager, now says he taught her to turn her phone off at dinner and on again when she had something to say. The world he leaves is not the one we know. It is a world that took longer to learn the pleasure of glass. It is a world where the camera in your pocket grew smart by committee and thus learned every trick twice. It is a world with more kinds of choice and fewer kinds of taste. It is a world where music never quite found a single store that could be both generous and sustainable. Instead, it learned to stream itself into ubiquity while artists learned to tour. It is a world where tablets are less like books and more like laptops with stage fright. It is a world where privacy required conferences to describe and laws to enforce and is still, in some mornings, a rumor. But it is also a world with children who learn to code because an open platform let them publish their first app in an afternoon. It is a world in which a phone running an operating system built in the wind found its way into towns where a day's wage could not buy a week of battery. It is a world where design did not win as a single doctrine, but as a set of manners slowly adopted by manufacturers who discovered that politeness in objects converts to profit. It is a world that never saw a turtleneck on a stage say, "One more thing," and yet learned, in a slower, Messier way, to expect the future to fit in a pocket. What if he had gone back? The mind builds that museum easily. The iMac that turned the desk into a smile, the iPod that taught us to carry 10,000 songs and a rosary of white earbuds, the iPhone that didn't feel like a phone at all, the App Store that turned ambition into a cottage industry and then into a metropolis, the iPad that asked us to touch text like water. In that museum, we stand very still in front of glass cases and whisper because the artifacts are so obvious now that it is hard to remember that once they were not. In that museum, the lesson is that a single human being can bend an arc by obsessing over a corner radius. But in this universe, the lesson is different. Here, the hinge is the no that created everything else he did. Here, the empire he didn't rebuild allowed other empires to grow, some generous, some predatory, all human. Here, the perfection he held like a torch lit rooms he never entered, by people he never met, who learned to ask, in their own way, what the product was really about. Here, The pain of an unbuilt thing coexists with the grace of 1,000 built things that look, from certain angles, like distant cousins. Here, his genius is not a straight line, but a feel-the-pressure system the weather still remembers. Maybe that's the truest shape of influence. Not the products you ship, but the questions you leave behind. He left one that hovers over every lab at 2 in the morning. Every kitchen table where a founder draws a rectangle and erases the corners. Every boardroom where the cheapest answer flickers like a mirage. What is the simplest, truest thing we can build that forgives the world for being complicated? In one life, he answered by going back. In this one, he answered by going forward alone and daring the rest of us to follow without him. And if you hold your phone, the one you have, the one that history delivered to your hand, by routes he opened and routes he refused, you might notice something small and startling. In the way the screen wakes without resentment. In the way your thumb finds what it needs. In the way the device recedes for a second so that the moment can have the stage. There, in that pause, is the ghost of a man who never returned to the company that named him, and yet still taught an entire industry how to disappear. There are infinite universes, some arranged by laws of physics, others by the small pivots of a single human choice. In one, he walked back through a set of glass doors and gave us a decade of inevitabilities. In another, he stayed outside and gave the future to a chorus. In both, the cost was real. In both, the gift was heavy. In both, we learned that progress is not a ladder but a compass, and that the hardest part is not finding north, but refusing every other direction until the needle stops trembling.